So, Dr. Mutegi, welcome to Learning for Truth and Love. And I want
Thank
to
you.
start by having you talk a little bit about yourself in terms of your career, your profession, and then talk about yourself in the context of being a father of Black boys.
Sure. I first want to say thank you. I appreciate the invitation to come share with you and with your listeners. Um, I'll start just
Welcome.
by giving you a bit of background on myself. I'm a professor of science education. I currently work at Old Dominion University in Southeast Virginia, and in this position, this professional position, I study the teaching and learning of science, and I teach courses to future and current teachers who might be teaching science.
Okay.
Sometimes these are science teachers, sometimes they're elementary teachers.
Mm-hmm.
My specific area of research is centered around the science teaching and learning of Black children in particular.
Okay.
And when I say Black, I'm referring to Black children no matter where we're found on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're Black in America, we might study African Americans. If we're Black in Cuba, we might study Afro Cubans. If we're Black in Canada, we might study Afro Canadians.
Yeah.
I take a Pan African perspective, and I engage in the study with the assumption that throughout the planet there's a thread of experience that ties us together as people of
Mm.
African descent, and that's the core of my professional teaching and research.
Wow.
Personally, I'm the father of two Black boys, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and some folks will think I'm crazy because one of them is 29, and and the other, well, he's about to be 29 later this month in about a week,
Okay.
and the other will be 10 in about a week.
Okay.
And
Wow.
so, quite literally, as one was leaving the house to go to college, the other one was
Mm-hmm.
being birthed into the house.
Wow.
And so,
Awesome.
though they're brothers, their experience growing up has, in both instances, been as only children for all intents and purposes.
Wow.
And so much of my parenting insight is informed by my work as an educator,
Mm.
but also it's been shaped by my experience as a young man growing up, and
Mm.
the insight and guidance that was given to me by my mother, and
Mm-hmm.
then just a disposition I have to be reflective about my own experiences as a
Mm-hmm.
child and teenager, and then as an adult.
Okay. Wow. Now I'm so curious. I'm curious about these questions. Well, I'm gonna make a note of them. If you see me writing, I'm curious about how your parenting has been shaped. Even by your position. But I want to hold off on that just for a second, and talk about your experience as a parent. Parent, as a Black father. Number one, what do you think are some things you've experienced? That maybe other fathers might not have had to experience. So talk about your fathering experience.
Yeah, that's difficult. It's what the reason I say it's difficult is because
Mm-hmm.
I can speak pretty clearly about experiences that I've had,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't speak to what other people may not have had. And quite
Okay,
honestly,
that's
I
fair.
don't feel
Makes
that
sense.
I'm terribly unique.
Mm-hmm.
I think that much of what I've experienced, it's probably in front of other fathers to experience,
Mm-hmm.
whether they realize it or not, whether they're reflective about it or not. I would assume that some of the more common.
Mm-hmm.
I'll share a quick story with you if you don't mind.
No, awesome.
Have I lost you?
No, I'm
Okay.
here.
So
Stories are great.
okay. So there's one instance where my older son, he was maybe sixth grade, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and he had done something. I don't remember what it was, but I
Mm-hmm.
know it was driving me crazy. And I have an uncle who used to cut our hair,
Mm-hmm.
and so my uncle and I were speaking on the phone, and in greeting each other, he said, "How's it going? How's the boy?"
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't tell him what was happening,
Mm-hmm.
but he must have heard it in my voice.
Okay.
And the first thing he said to me, we were both young that age once too, and he counseled me without me even
Mhm.
telling him what the situation was, and he was right on point.
Mhm.
And so the reason I share that story is because, again, I'm going to this idea that my experiences are not that unique.
Mhm.
It's common enough that another father who had gone through it with his own son, my cousin, could
Mhm.
recognize my response as a father and knew what I was dealing with and was able to counsel me to better fatherhood in that moment.
Wow.
And so the short answer for you is I don't think my experience is I don't think that my experience is terribly different.
Mhm. Okay. I think we lost each other just for a moment there.
Okay. Do you need me to?
No, it's fine. Because it would have come through. I just wanted to continue. So what exactly happened if you want to share that? Um, that he was giving you some insights on.
Listen, I don't remember. I don't remember at all what it was.
Okay.
But
That's
I can
okay.
say
You
that.
just remember the experience of getting the advice. That's all right. It's like it takes a village kind of idea, right? So you mentioned in the beginning that
I will say this though.
mhm,
I was going to say, having been a young man and raised in, the
mhm,
types of issues that you deal with boys are fairly simple.
mhm,
Um, Young men are as boys growing into their minds and their bodies
mhm,
as young men.
mhm,
Them trying to exert themselves and you trying to restrain them or trying to help them to develop
mhm,
restraints, a sense of when they should restrain themselves. And so,
mhm.
without knowing the specifics of it, almost guaranteed that is where the conflict was. Uh, I
Okay.
don't, I never had much conflict outside of that space with either of my sons.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. So well, I'll just tell you some experience from my perspective. Being a mom, I know that I have spoken to different friends who are and even peers in the field who are black moms, and so we talk about raising black boys, and oftentimes our experience, our feelings as black women are very different, are very similar, rather. Our experience as black women are very similar, or we should say the same. But oftentimes I would have someone say, well, you know, it's a little different because your son, my son is black, yours is not really black. Even though me as a black mom, I position my son as a black boy, especially he is a black boy standing next to a white boy, right? And so, there are
Mm.
things as a mom I've had to consider. And one of the important things for me is being at a place that not only encourages him and promotes his development. One. Number two, allows him to understand more about himself, more about, his African American culture in very positive, self-defining ways are some of the things that I've thought of as a mother. um and it's hard to say what part of that is influenced by my experience as a science educator, but I just remember just thinking about um really curious about, well, what is he learning about the African American culture, what is he learning about black culture, and that being very important to me. I'm curious as to what have you thought about, even as I guess the one closest to home now would be your 10-year-old, right, who or almost 10-year-old who is with at home. What are some things you've really um what are some considerations you've had to make, as a father in his education?
Yeah, you mean in general or specifically where it relates to learning about being Black?
I'd say either. Whichever is more important to you. Whichever you want to talk about.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I appreciate that question. And I'll speak to, I know you asked about my younger son, but I'll speak to both.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things that is a challenge for Black parents is how to find strong educational spaces. And I have a
Okay.
colleague who does research on Black families in education, and
Mhm.
her dissertation and subsequent studies have explored this. It's almost always a choice between what gaps are we going to allow, and I had that same
Mm.
experience as a
Yeah.
father.
Mhm.
And so with my older son, I opted to send him to a, a strong private school. It
Mhm.
was predominantly white,
Mhm.
and my sense was that I can teach him Blackness at home.
Mhm.
And so we spent a lot of time me exposing him to Black spaces, Black people,
Mhm.
Black thought and ideology.
Mhm.
Um, and then also there was a lot of coaching of
Mhm.
me with him as he's navigating these white spaces, which are sometimes hostile
Mhm.
to Black children.
Mhm.
I'll just give a couple of quick examples.
Mhm.
At the end of every day, many parents ask, "How was your day?"
Mhm.
And there's a discussion around what happened during the day.
Yeah.
I very intentionally, with my older son, turned this into a daily debrief.
Mhm.
And I remember one point, as he's getting kids become teenagers and not quite as talkative, and I
Mhm.
chastised him. I said, "Look, man, I send you to school every day. Your job is to do reconnaissance.
Mhm.
You are going there and find out what they're doing and bring it back, and we're going to plan about how we're going to make life better for ourselves." And he took the chastisement. He kind of laughed, but I think it signaled to him that okay, this is not just an idle question. We're supposed to
Mhm.
do something with this information. And so we were very strategic. He would say,
Yeah.
"Here's the with a teacher. Here's why I don't like it." And
Mhm.
I would offer. I say, "Okay, I can see two or three things that we can do to address it.
Mhm.
I can address it with the school principal, and I won't say every day, but very consistently
Mhm.
throughout the school year, we
Yeah.
would jointly plan how to move forward.
Mhm.
And more than dealing with those specific incidents, it modeled for him how you can address problems. And
Mhm.
they say if all you know how to use is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
Yep.
So this practice has shown, look, every problem is not a hammer.
Mhm.
It's not a nail, rather. Sometimes you can use a hammer. Sometimes
Mhm.
you can use another tool. Sometimes you can ignore it.
Right.
And as time went on, I released more autonomy to determine how you want to address this problem.
Mm.
Um, I said I was going to give you a couple of examples because
Mhm.
my younger son's personality is a lot different. And so
Mhm.
with my older son, we would do this type of planning. I don't know that my younger son has the same outlook.
Mhm.
Um, I can say something to my older son when he was young, and he would know what he could share with others.
Mhm.
My younger son is like a pot with holes in it. Everything that goes in is going to come out. So the approach has to be a bit different. The,
Mhm.
the, the end goal can be the same.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so again, I'm talking about uh, how as a father, I work to
Mhm.
instill an understanding of blackness and position. This is one strategy.
Mhm.
I would say in a more formal sense,
Mhm.
with both of my sons, my wife and I have been intentional about giving them exposure to Black culture. So we
Mhm.
do a lot of spend a lot of time going to museums,
Mm.
and not just
Mhm.
going and letting them run loose, but
Right.
going and walking through with them and teaching them how to use the museum.
Yeah.
So this past spring, we went to Jefferson Davis was president of the Confederacy, I believe.
Mhm.
So he has the White House of the Confederacy is in Richmond, Virginia, and we
Mhm.
drove up there for a day during spring break.
Yeah.
and spent time there. And my son
Mhm.
was my younger son. He was not terribly interested. They had studied it in school, but he wanted to do other things.
Mhm.
And so he said, "No, we're going to do other things, but first we're going through this museum and we're going to read these placards and understand what they mean."
Mhm.
And so we did that. And then
Mhm.
afterwards, we looked for opportunities to make connections. Oh, remember when we saw this at the museum? Yeah, I remember that. Okay, here's
Mhm.
another instance of where we see the same principle at play, whether it's
Mhm.
a street name or something we watch on in a movie or on television. And
Mhm.
so for Black parents to provide to their children.
Mhm. Are you there? Okay. So,
Yes,
oh, okay.
that was me ending that that answer.
Oh, I wasn't sure if you were done or if you paused or if you were fixing. That's why. Mhm. So, it's interesting you
Yes.
said you mentioned in the beginning you know, the debrief after school. I had the same thing. And it's very interesting because I would talk to other parents, because most of because the private school my son was in, predominantly white parents, and I especially talk to parents. I shouldn't say I talk to both parents with boys and girls, but eventually after a time, the ones you connect with because you're talking about issues, boys or parents with boys. And so it's interesting to hear a lot of times. I was like, oh, he shares all of that. I was like, yeah, because I was also very intentional with the daily debriefing, and I was also used picking him up from school as an opportunity to debrief, right? And do a lot of listening to understand how his day was, and figure out whether or not there were perspectives that I needed to help him to adjust. But it's very interesting you said that, because I think I just want to share that that's something I have in common. I'm sure other parents, I could see thinking the same way. Um, you're just using them as opportunities of learning and thinking of ourselves as almost like troubleshooters in a way, right? As you mentioned, which gap do we want him to
Right.
have? He's going to have a gap, right? Whether it's in a gap in understanding himself and building in healthy ways his identity, or whether it's a gap in um, schoolwork. And you and I, when we were talking earlier, you were mentioning the same thing as well. It's there's
Mhm.
always going to be a gap, and what is that gap is now. And I know sometimes the gaps that we think about, especially the cognitive part, are very common to all, right? Whether or not you're black or white, sometimes those gaps are just there. Um, but the other type of gap, the one that really, I guess, matters in the end in terms of how we see ourselves, that has that emotional connection. I love that you've been so explicit about it, because that's something I've had to develop and I've had to learn. And so one of the things I would end up doing, because that was, I've always envisioned taking him there and having these conversations. I have a friend who, she does a great job of really having these conversations with her daughter, and because she's also a Disney fan, they would sit down and they would actually talk about, okay, but this is what's happening here. So she would use it as an opportunity to have these discussions. Now, I'm not like that, right? I'm not like that, as vocal, and I would sit down and use this as an opportunity for discussion, because, I can also see my boy saying, you know, stop talking during the movie or, or stuff like that. So I'm just curious as to, and I love the museum example, taking him to the museum to really have these discussion. First of all, I'm curious as to what were some, even in taking him to the museum and even in troubleshooting, what are some things you thought were really important for him to know, that you really wanted him to understand, um, you know, by doing all of this? I'm not sure if you're frozen or I'm frozen. Well, I see you as frozen, but I'm not sure if that's because I'm frozen. So,
I don't. Yeah. know that I thought through a list of specific things.
Oh, okay. Oh, I think we lost you. Okay, so maybe it was his connection. All right, we're gonna wait for a moment for Dr. Mutegi to jump on back.
You hear me now?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I did hear your question down, so I
Mm-hmm.
logged back in.
Okay.
Uh, so basically, you're asking what things I don't know that I have a list, but I'm going to share some things that come readily to mind.
Sure.
If for some reason I go out, if you can give me a hand signal so I can pause and be sure that the connection is strong.
Okay.
One thing I would say uh, about his development as a person within himself that
Mm-hmm.
I think is vital is that he embraced virtues.
Mm.
And you could probably pull any list if you pull a list of say the 25 common virtues, that
Mm-hmm.
would be a good list.
Okay.
They're very common things like honesty,
Mm-hmm.
integrity, perseverance, hard
Mm-hmm.
work. These are important.
Yeah.
Some might say this is not related to blackness, but it
Mm-hmm.
is.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a climate where the inherent or cultural decency that we have developed as a race of people
Mm-hmm.
has been consistently eroded
Mm-hmm.
through slavery, through post-slavery, Jim Crow. If you travel to Africa through colonialism,
Mm-hmm.
every effort is made by Western powers to destabilize us as a race of people. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the primary attacks is our character as people.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
how can we come to trust each other to do? How can
Mm-hmm.
we face challenges and overcome challenges if we don't persevere? If we don't have a sense of perseverance, you can't do it.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And so, these basic virtues, which I think, from my understanding of history, we had in spades going back millenniums into antiquity. We are there's been a consistent onslaught against us, and now I'd say in the past 40, 50 years, we're seeing that we are embracing vice, and
Mm-hmm.
we're associating that vice with our inherent nature as black people. That is something that we need to fight against as
Mm-hmm.
parents with ourselves and with our children.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's number one.
Absolutely.
Um, I think that is more important than any specific facts.
Yeah.
I'd rather have a young man who is honest and works hard than one who knows quadratic equations. Man,
Mm.
quadratic equations ain't even that important, but honesty and work hard is always important.
Mm-hmm.
So it trumps any of the specific facts that we send our kids to school to
Right.
learn. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, stepping away from that, when I look at the history and how we've been where we are historically, one of the things that it's important for Black children to learn to
Mm-hmm.
understand is that the condition we see ourselves in currently is a
Mm-hmm.
very small bit of history when we look at the whole of human history.
Mm-hmm.
So historically, Black Africans have been the world leaders in terms of our advanced civilization, our advanced knowledge, and it's incumbent on us as to help our children know not just that as a principle, but some of the specifics of that.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I, we went on a study tour with Ashra Kwesi to ancient Egypt, or Kemet,
Mm.
and
Nice.
it was phenomenal
Yeah.
that our ancestors were able to build some of the monuments that they were able to build in the way they
Mm-hmm.
were able to build them.
Yeah.
On the tour, there were masons,
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean the fraternal order masons. I mean people that actually work with brick and stone
Mm-hmm.
in building construction.
Yeah.
One of the monuments was we were in the back of the monument. It was a temple actually, and
Mm-hmm.
the theme in this temple was medicinal knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the tour group was looking at one of the stela, which had medical instruments depicted.
Mm-hmm.
Another member was on a back wall with a compass, and he held the compass against the wall, and it showed north. It
Mm-hmm.
showed perfect magnetic north. When I say perfect, I mean the needle was on the end.
Mm-hmm.
And where we were, that wall was oriented toward the front door. So this temple was constructed so that the front door faced magnetic north.
Mm.
And when he showed members of the group that, we were just in awe. And that was my first introduction to
Wow.
the idea of architectural alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And our ancestors were able to align architectural monuments to each other, to the
Mm-hmm.
four cardinal directions, to stars, to celestial events.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is
Wow.
just one example of some of the historical knowledge that all Black children should know, that that's the people we come from.
Yeah.
Not so that we can sit back and feel good about what we used to be,
Mm-hmm.
but it gives us an ability to put our current situation in context. We can know that, okay, we are in a slump right now. This is not our
Mm-hmm.
normal condition.
Mm.
And then the task is, what do we need to do to get out of the slump?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So another that leads to the other bit of history that I think is important for Black children to know
Mm-hmm.
is that we are in a slump and why we are in the slump.
Mm-hmm.
And in this instance, it's impossible, as I look at history and apply logic,
Mm-hmm.
it's impossible to get around the idea, the reality that we are in our slump, first and foremost, because of what whites have done to us.
Mm.
And then secondarily, because of what we have not done for ourselves.
Mm.
And so I'll use a metaphor. Imagine that you are a builder and you're really good at building buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a mission. You're going to build, say you build hospitals. You're going to build hospitals throughout the country.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you go to New York and you build a hospital. And then you go down to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, you build a hospital. And
Mm-hmm.
then you move further west to Columbus and you build a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by the time you get to Columbus, my crew come along and we good destroyers. We destroy the hospital you built in New York.
Mm.
And when you leave Columbus and go to Indianapolis, we come to the one you built in Pittsburgh and we destroy that one. And
Mm.
each time you move somewhere else, we come and destroy something else that you've made.
Mm-hmm.
The destroyer is guilty
Mm-hmm.
for destroying, but you also have culpability because you have not put in place some measure to stop the destroyer from destroying.
Mm.
And so, in our current condition, yes, you can't say that there's not a destroyer working to undermine what we are producing for
Mm-hmm.
ourselves.
Absolutely.
But we are culpable if we don't try to do something to stop the people who are enacting this destruction on us.
Right.
Now, just to make practical sense,
Mm-hmm.
if I say, okay, I want my son, he wants to be a doctor, I want to encourage him becoming a doctor. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of life does he want? Well, he wants to get some money so he can provide for himself, live a comfortable
Mm-hmm.
life. He probably wants to have a wife and children, money to be able to himself, provide for them.
Yeah.
But at some point along his development, if I don't teach him, look, no matter how much you make, somebody will steal it from you if you let them. If I don't teach him that
Mm-hmm.
message,
Yeah.
he the people that see him, the various ways that they will see all the doctrine knowledge you have. They are the
Oh. Okay. He broke up. Okay. All right. I'm gonna wait for Dr. Mutegi to come back. Um, you're out right now and your video is out, but this system has a way of continuing to record and give high quality recording even when yours is broken up. So I can't see you now, just to let you know. Uh, you might need to come back out and go back in. That might be the best thing. Okay, let me text. Uh, I'm gonna pause. Oh no, it doesn't let me pause. Okay. You see, you have two of your back. That's why I was asking you. Oh, okay.
Say what now?
I
To
said there are two of you that are back.
okay, is one what?
You might. Are
Is it
you
just one?
Are you
Is one of
Did you go on a different computer, a different device, or the same one? Okay. So, you know what? Okay, there you are, clear. Are you on a different computer?
no, same here.
Okay, so why is there three of you showing up? All right, so let's come back out and come back in then. I'll end it for everybody and come back in, okay?